Well, now that the secretive and unconventional process for adopting the GOP 2024 platform has been finalized, conservatives who find themselves disappointed by the party's watered down language on protecting the sanctity of life and the family and marriage must still move forward as the November elections approaches. Just as I was discussing with Senator Ron Johnson, the Democrats' radical agenda pushing abortion until birth provides a stark contrast between the parties. So how do we balance these things? We're not saying don't engage, but we're also saying don't be quiet either. We can do both. We can be involved and we can advance those candidates that most clearly align with biblical values, but at the same time not be quiet when they deviate from them either. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Homeland Security Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Hawley, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, Senator, I played a clip earlier in the program of a speech that you made this week. You were critical of the decision to change the Republican Party platform from what has been declared in the platform for more than 40 years as it pertained to human life. Why do you see this as such a mistake?
Well, life is a principle that unites Republicans and should, and it's one of the most important things that we have to offer the country in terms of our witness, and particularly for us as Christians. But I mean, listen, we have been a pro-life party, Republicans have, since 1976. I mean, when it first entered our platform. And I think at this moment in particular, when we see the right to life return to voters as it should be, that Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision, absolutely right. It ought to be the people making these decisions, not judges. But as this now has been returned to voters, we need all the more to say to voters, you should support life. Here's why. We should be advocating for life. We shouldn't be silent about it. We shouldn't be reticent about it. We should be advocating for it. My concern is this platform seems to walk away from that and walk away from traditional marriage as well, and I think both are mistakes.
And I agree 100%. And had I had the opportunity, we were going to amend the document, but for the first time ever, it was not allowed. There was no debate, no discussion, no amendments. Very troubling, the process itself. But we talk about the people, all right? And I'm hearing that a lot, and I know what you mean by that, but I want to unpack that because the people do have a vote, but in our system of government, the people have elected representatives. They have them at the state level. Now, some states allow for direct, they have voter initiatives and they have ballot initiatives, but still, most policy is decided by those that we elect at both the state and the federal level. So our leaders need to be leading on this issue as well, do they not?
Yeah, they do, and this is why I think it's important what we as a party say our principles are. It's important that we be strong advocates for life. And at the federal level, let's just take things that I would think a vast majority of Americans agree on, like no taxpayer funding for abortions, not using the military to fund or facilitate abortions, which this administration is doing, by the way, not harvesting fetal tissue, not engaging in the use of the instrumentalities of the federal government to promote abortion. This is an administration that wants to mail abortion pills into every state in the union, regardless of what state laws are, regardless of what voters in the state have voted on. As Republicans, we should say no to all those things, and we should say we are for life, we advocate for life.
Let me ask you about that, Senator Hawley, because that actually came up in the presidential debate. Because it was a Supreme Court decision. They didn't actually make a decision on the merits of the abortion pill. It was an issue of standing. But nonetheless, it exposed the fact of what you just said. The FDA has said these can be mailed, sent through the mail, the Justice Department writing off an opinion that would violate the Comstock law that prohibits this from being done. But it's being done. So if you have a state that has pro-life laws, they're being trampled upon by the federal government. So there is a federal role.
Well, this is an important point, Tony, because this is the federal government, the Biden administration, trying to override what voters are actually voting on. Most abortions in America are chemical abortions. They are achieved through these pills that are ingested, and Joe Biden changed the law regarding these abortion pills and said you don't need a prescription for it anymore. You don't need to see a doctor, which is medically dangerous, by the way, both of those things. And his
Right.
administration saying it doesn't matter if you live in a state where either the voters directly or elected representatives have said, you know what, we're going to limit abortion or we're not going to have abortion except for certain exceptions. The Biden administration's position is we don't care. We're going to send these abortion drugs into your state regardless. So it doesn't matter what the voters say. Tony, that is, if that's true, if that is allowed to stand, then the Dobbs decision doesn't really matter much because then the people don't
Right.
really have control of this issue. It's federal bureaucrats who have control of the issue. They're imposing their view on us, all 50 states. I think that's wrong.
Well, and you now have upwards of 70% of all abortions being done through the abortion pill. So we're not talking about just some, peripheral issue. This is becoming the main issue. But this is not the only area that federal policy. We saw the case out of Idaho where their law was challenged in the emergency room guidelines provided by the federal government. So the federal government has its tentacles in so many different places that if, in fact, we're going to give the states the ability, and I'm going to get to that in a moment as to if that is the right approach, but if we're going to do that, there's a lot of cleanup that has to be done at the federal level.
Well, and the number one thing is that if the Dobbs opinion is going to have real effect, if in fact it's no longer going to be judges who are deciding these issues, it's going to be the people and their elected representatives. If that's going to be true, then their votes are going to have to matter. And if you have the federal government saying, we don't care how you vote, we don't care what you think, we don't care what you decide, we're going to send abortion drugs into your state. We're going to use the regulations on emergency rooms and other areas of the hospital system in order to impose abortions on you regardless. My gosh, Tony, nothing's changed. I mean, the people don't have control of the issue. And I think as Republicans, we need to be clear on that, and we need to be uncompromising advocates for life.
Right. And I also think I want to step back for just a moment, maybe I wouldn't say philosophically, but I want to step back for just a second from a specific policy. If you have a moral absolute, it doesn't stop at the boundaries of a state. And when you look at an inalienable right, which our founders recognized came to us from God, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how is it that we could say that that right to life is only existent in certain states? Could we say the same thing about our liberty?
You made this point, I thought, in a piece of yours that I read recently where you talked about the principle that we have always stood on, or at least for the last 40 years as Republicans, the aspiration to protect all life, to have our consistent message be to the country that every life is valuable, that every life has dignity. And listen, I'm 100% for voters having control of this issue. I really am. I'm for voting in the states. I'm for people voting however they can, wherever they can. I think that voters, not judges, should have control of this. So I'm 100% for that. As Republicans, we need to, at the same time, however, we need to advocate on the principle that you were just articulating. I think we need to be bold about that and say we support the pro-life position, and here's why. It is a matter of principle for us. And so, yes, the people should have control. Yes, the Constitution commits it to the people. But here's why here's why we as Republicans believe so strongly that this is a matter of moral principle, and we urge our fellow citizens to adopt a pro-life position, and we're here for that long debate for as long as it takes until we hope people agree with us and we can protect every innocent life.
Now, Senator Hawley, I know I can have a very candid conversation with you because I know where you're coming from, you and your wife. I don't know of two more pro-life warriors in this country. I don't know that there's daylight between us on any issue. But I've been in the pro-life movement. It's how I got into politics. I wouldn't have ever entered politics had it not been for the life issue 32 years ago. And I'm scratching my head, okay? And I don't think I'm alone. Because post-Dobbs, all of a sudden the narrative changed a little bit from Republicans who were championing a human rights amendment, a human life amendment. They were championing the application of the 14th Amendment to the unborn. And all of a sudden, the narrative changed after Dobbs to, this is now for the people. This is their deal. they can handle it at the state level. You know, I never heard that before June of 2022.
Well, I think one of the reasons for that, Tony, is that the people didn't have any rights to vote on this before June 2022. I mean, which is wrong, by the way. I mean, this was an issue totally controlled by not judges in general, 9 justices at the U.S. Supreme Court, which is totally unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't give them any authority to impose their views. But just because the Dobbs decision has been issued, and I think it was right, as I've said, I think Dobbs was absolutely rightly decided, that doesn't mean that now it's time for Republicans to abandon their advocacy for life. That doesn't mean it's time to say, "Oh, you know, we're indifferent on this issue." Well, we don't really care. There's nothing to be done. If the military wants to facilitate abortions, I guess we'll just roll over and accept that. No. I think our advocacy has got to be as strong as ever, and we've got to redouble our efforts to build that national consensus, because now the voters do have the issue, and now we do get to decide it as we the people, and that's as it should be, which means we need more advocacy, not less.
Absolutely, 100%. But I just want to drive this point home, because when I hear, and again, this is not for you, this is just in general that I'm saying this, that when we hear about the people voting in our form of government, most of our voting as people are done through our elected representatives. So there is that role for those who lead our government, whether it be at the state level or the federal government. And I agree with you. There needs to be as much advocacy as there was before. But I'm very concerned that, you know, in 2022, there was this almost stampede mentality running away from the issue. And you can't win a debate if you won't enter into the discussion. And that's what I think has happened predominantly among Republicans. They're just not talking about it with the same passion and conviction that they had before.
And this is what concerns me about the platform change. Listen, Tony, I'm not under any illusion that most voters read the platform, but it is important to the extent that it does reflect our principles as a party. And I think now more than ever, we need to stand on principle. And if folks say, well, you know, hey, this is now a matter for the people, a matter for voters, and that means we're indifferent, and we as Republicans, that is, and we don't really care, and we don't want to talk about it anymore, and, you know, just whatever happens. Boy, that's not my perspective. I mean, my perspective is I haven't changed my view. Every single life, every person is made in the image of God. Every single life matters, and we ought to be clear on that, especially now that the voters and their elected representatives have the say, which is what the Constitution says.
Right. Agreed. And my concern is enthusiasm is dampened by the lack of enthusiasm by leaders on this issue, that the voters will lack the enthusiasm we need in November. Final thought from you, Senator, as we come up to the end of the program.
Well, I just think that the principles that we have stood on for so many years, protecting the family, fighting for traditional marriage, and above all, standing on the sanctity of life and saying that is a bedrock value. If you don't have the right to life, you don't have the right to anything else. I think as Republicans now more than ever, we want to say this is where we stand and this is what we believe.
And I pray that there are more Republican leaders like yourself saying that unequivocally. Senator Josh Hawley, always great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And folks, you can weigh in and text the word report to 67742 and sign the petition that will go to the RNC chairman, Michael Whatley, telling the Republicans to stand bold for life. We all have to do our part. Text the word report to 67742 and send a strong message by signing on to the Minority Report in support of life.